Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Soul Land 2 Part 274 based on novel. So let's start. Huiyuhao held Tang Wutong's hand as they flew through the air, while Radiant City was in a complete mess not far behind them. Radiant City was in disarray. Not just because of Shu Qianran's death, but also because many aerial surveillance Soul tools were exploding. Only a small number of people knew about Shu Qianran's death for the moment, but the entire city's citizens could see the exploding aerial surveillance Soul tools in the sky. That was something that couldn't be hidden. Radiant City had descended into chaos, and nobody knew how long it would take before it could settle down. However, Huiyuhao was very confident in Zhu Zi. She was too capable, and almost every situation was within her grasp. Since she had prepared to deal with Shu Qianran, she had definitely also prepared for what would come afterward. Now was the time for her to flip her cards one after another. Huiyuhao and Tang Wutong left just like that. He didn't even try to arrange anything, and neither did he obtain a definite answer from Zhu Zi. He knew that they were leaving a little too abruptly. He also wanted to stay, and he wanted to watch Zhu Zi reorganize the Sun Moon Empire's internal affairs, and execute her promise of not moving against the Star Luo Empire and the Douling Empire within 10 years. That was her best choice. As long as he and Tang Wutong were around to intimidate the Sun Moon Empire, he believed that she wouldn't dare to do anything rash. But he had to leave. If he didn't leave, both he and Tang Wutong would probably not be able to leave ever again. Huiyuhao and Tang Wutong had rained hell upon Shu Qianran to destroy him during that epic battle, but serious problems surfaced in their bodies. Cracks were conspicuously tearing out over the barriers that Long Xiaoyao and Yi Shishui had left in their bodies, and these barriers could crumble at any moment. Once these barriers crumbled, they would both run the risk of going insane. This was especially so for Huiyuhao, because the evil eye tyrant king's spiritual power was still revolting violently within his spiritual sea. The Sky Dream Iceworm really couldn't hold on any longer, and he didn't even have time to take this news back to Shrek Academy at a time like this. They had to find a place to cultivate. Otherwise, they would be faced with certain death. Therefore, he said a few brief sentences before he quickly took Tang Wutong away from Radiant City and toward the Heavenly Soul Empire. "How are you, Yuhao?" Tang Wutong could clearly feel that Huiyuhao's palm was ice cold, and his soul power was surging about vigorously within his body. His body radiated with strange light, and that was a sign of Huiyuhao almost losing control over his soul power. Huiyuhao didn't look so good as he said, "I'm afraid I can't hold on for much longer. We have to find a place to cultivate. If not, we'll be in trouble." Tang Wutong nodded and said, "Let's do it here. We can't delay this any longer." There was a valley beneath them. They couldn't be bothered with getting the direction right because of the big problems that had risen in their bodies, and they didn't know where they were. But they couldn't be bothered with anything else as they immediately went down. Tang Wutong punched a hole in the side of the mountain, and she supported Huiyuhao as they snuck inside. They didn't even have time to conceal themselves at a time like this. "The two of you can rest assured as you cultivate. We'll protect you guys." The Snow Empress and the Ice Empress emerged from Huiyuhao's body at the same time. They had nervous expressions on their faces, because the soul power and spiritual power within Huiyuhao's body were just too vast. Even with their experience and their knowledge, they had never seen such vast energy undulations, which seemed to go beyond this world's limits, and Huiyuhao could explode at any moment. If that happened, then all the effort that they had put in before this would be wasted. Huiyuhao couldn't even express his gratitude. He was barely able to fly, and he was already controlling himself as much as he could. He sat down on the ground and immediately focused as he used all his spiritual power to control his soul power. Tang Wutong helped him cross his legs and sat opposite him. They could no longer use Haodong power to cultivate. Furthermore, the soul power within their bodies was too vast, so she couldn't help Huiyuhao at all. She was facing a similarly huge problem, and she only observed Huiyuhao for a moment and made sure that he wasn't in any danger before she started to meditate. The first thing she had to do was maintain that barrier in her body before anything else. Huiyuhao's barrier was starting to break apart irrevocably, a soul power that resembled tidal waves surged around in this body. Hui Yuhao's spiritual soul core had been filled by the evil Eye Tyrant King's formidable spiritual power, and Long Xiaoyao's soul power had also filled his ultimate ice soul core to the brim. Hui Yuhao's body was like an enormous balloon that had been pumped with as much air as it could take, and it was still being pumped continuously. Hui Yuhao's body was already starting to swell. His veins bulged on his skin, and his body was an unhealthy red color. A golden sun and a blue moon flickered incessantly behind him, and the air would contort faintly with every flicker. Fortunately, Tang Wutong was sitting opposite him. A golden sun and a purple moon flickered behind her at the same time, and they resonated with Hui Yuhao's aura. This resonance, and perhaps also because of their yin-yang complement soul cores, barely suppressed that energy storm in Hui Yuhao's body. The Ice Empress and the Snow Empress stood guard at the cave entrance. The Ice Empress glanced at the Snow Empress worriedly and asked, "Is not in a very good state. Can he hold on?" The Snow Empress lowered her voice and said, "He definitely can. Haven't we succeeded in tiding through every single trouble and toil over these years, no matter what we've faced? This is the last step he has to take, and if he can succeed, then he will rise through the heavens. Our dream will come true. But if he fails?" The Snow Empress smiled brightly as she spoke. "So what if he fails? If not for him, we'd probably have been dead a long time ago. Let's just accompany him if he fails." The Ice Empress was astonished. "Have you made up your mind, Snow Empress?" The Snow Empress smiled faintly and replied, "Are you really asking me that? Haven't you made up your mind too? You're just unwilling to admit it. Even though you're always so fierce toward the Sky Dream Iceworm every day, I can tell that your eyes have become increasingly tender and gentle. Seems like you've truly found someone that you like. You have already decided to fuse your origin with Yuhao, haven't you? And you're going to do that because Skydream has already completed his own fusion in order to help him. So we are left with our spiritual origin, and that's the last strength we can use to help him. We cannot be separated from him after completing this fusion, and even if he does succeed in reaching that world in the end, we cannot separate ourselves from him. That's the true meaning of one for all, and all for one. I can't bear to leave you guys. So why can't I have made up my mind?" The Ice Empress held the Snow Empress' hand. She blushed as he said, "Snow, I didn't with that fellow." The Snow Empress giggled and said, "We've known each other for hundreds of thousands of years. How can I not know what you're thinking about? Don't overthink this, because I'm not trying to tease you. I am truly happy for the two of you. Aren't we all in a good place right now? Yes. No matter what, we have to help him pass this difficult test. Let me go first, Snow. Yuhao is in a terrible situation now, and he needs to stabilize himself. All right, go. I'll stay here." The Snow Empress looked at the Ice Empress seriously, and she hugged her gently before she released her with a faint smile on her face. The Ice Empress skittered before the Snow Empress, and she gave her a peck on her face before she giggled and ran away. Hui Yuhao was in a terrible situation. One could say that he was in the worst condition that he had ever been in. There was just too much energy within his body. What he wanted most was to vent the vast energy out of his body, but he couldn't do that at all. Hui Yuhao couldn't control his soul power with his spiritual power because his spiritual power was in a mess in the first place. The Evil Eye Tyrant King's spiritual power had already been cleansed, but that spiritual power itself was violent, like it contained a formidable avenging spirit within it. It continued to wreak havoc, and it wanted to dominate Hui Yuhao's spiritual sea. The Evil Eye Tyrant King had been a formidable soul beast with more than 700,000 years of cultivation. Even though his body was dead, he could still retaliate while drawing his last breath. It's no wonder I didn't feel any spiritual undulations after his death. He hid his spirit strength within his soul ring, and his compressed vast amounts of spiritual power inside it. It's clear that the Evil Eye Tyrant King calculated precisely before his death that I had to absorb his soul core, and what he's trying to do now is possess me. He wants to possess my body. Hui Yuhao wouldn't be afraid of the Evil Eye Tyrant King if Long Xiaoyao hadn't infused all that soul power into his body. He had the Sky Dream Ice Worm and the Mermaid Princess, and his spiritual power was incredibly powerful in the first place. Hu Hao still had his power of emotions, and the Evil Eye Tyrant King was unworthy of competing with him because he only had his spiritual origin left. But Hu Hao was in deep trouble right now, because the soul power within his body was revolting. His soul power was revolting to the point where he couldn't concentrate to deal with the Evil Eye Tyrant King, which was his biggest problem. Hu Hao's spiritual sea was chaotic. The Mermaid Princess and the Sky Dream Ice Worm could barely hold on, and he was in the same situation. His mind was starting to feel groggy. Fortunately, his spiritual soul core was strong enough that the Evil Eye Tyrant King's spirit couldn't truly complete the possession. But the outcome would remain the same if this situation was allowed to continue. The Evil Eye Tyrant King was intelligent. He could clearly feel what Hu Hao was experiencing, because he wouldn't have done anything otherwise. What he could do was wait for an opportunity when something was happening to Hu Hao's body. Once Hu Hao couldn't control the soul power within his body, and once the Evil Eye Tyrant King completely unleashed his havoc, then Hu Hao's soul core would no longer be stable. That was the best time for possession. The Evil Eye Tyrant King was still pleased with being able to possess an ultimate Dolor's body. He had had a chance to escape with his spirit when Hu Hao killed him, and he could even be reborn through one of his descendants' bodies. The Evil Eye Tyrant King had a very formidable spirit, and killing him completely wasn't that easy. But he didn't choose that, because he had his eyes on Hu Hao's body. The Evil Eye Tyrant King's strength would be greatly affected if he had chosen one of his descendants for rebirth, and he would need a long time to regain his peak condition. That was still possible back then, and all he needed was more time. That was the conservative choice. But he couldn't make the same choice this time because he was about to face his next tribulation, and his tribulation wouldn't care if he was severely injured or if he had been reborn through possession. The tribulation would target his soul, and the Evil Eye Tyrant King wasn't confident of successfully making it through this great tribulation even if he was at his peak. He didn't have formidable life energy like the Beast God did, not to mention when he was already severely injured. He would truly meet his demise once that tribulation struck. Therefore, he chose to take the riskier path after some thought, and he chose to possess Hu Hao's body. Just as Hu Hao had guessed, the Evil Eye Tyrant King was certain that Hu Hao couldn't possibly abandon such a formidable soul ring, and the Evil Eye Tyrant King would still have time to possess one of his descendants even if Hu Hao did forego it. And once Hu Hao absorbed his soul ring, the Evil Eye Tyrant King would aim to find a chance to possess his body. A soul beast's body couldn't conceal his aura, but a human body could. Furthermore, Hu Hao had such a high cultivation and formidable soul power. If the Evil Eye Tyrant King could succeed in possessing his body and complete his third soul core, then he would be absolutely confident of making it through his next tribulation. He could even use this human body to break through into the God realm. The Evil Eye Tyrant King was overcome with intense greed, and that was the reason why he chose this riskier path. It seemed like his opportunity had come, and success was within his grasp. Therefore, he wasn't hasty at all. He was waiting for something to happen to Hu Hao's body before he would make an all-out attack. He didn't want to ruin this body, because what would be the point of possession if that happened? He had to wait until Hu Hao was about to crumble before he could take control over his body. Afterwards, he would rely on his formidable spiritual power after fusing with Hu Hao's body to control the violent revolting soul power, suppress it, and slowly absorb it. The Evil Eye Tyrant King became increasingly satisfied with the current situation as he continued to think. Everything was going better than he had expected, a perfect body, a perfect type, and a spiritual sea that was so powerful that it could carry his spiritual power. There was still the soul power that was unabsorbed but extremely pure, and the shape of a third soul core was within reach. This was the best kind of gift that the heavens could give him. A bluish-green shadow glimmered into view behind Hu Hao in this moment. She wasn't considered extremely beautiful, but her ice-cold aura and majestic elegance, her perfect and alluring body, and her jade-green frame gave off a unique and exotic beauty. Tang Wutong was having it easier as she sat opposite Hu Hao. Her golden sun and purple moon's light flickered as they radiated and dimmed continuously. Even though she was unstable, her undulations weren't as vigorous. But Hu Hao's situation was a lot worse. His golden sun flourished, but his blue moon was exceptionally dim as thick mist steamed from his body. His clothes were completely soaked as large beads of sweat rolled down from his forehead. The Ice Empress took a deep breath. Her body became like her scorpion's tail, and glowed with brilliant jade green light. That green color wasn't one that was filled with life, but one that was cold to the extreme. The mist that rose from Hui Yuhao's body was immediately transformed into countless ice particles that drifted down, and the cavern was cleansed. The Ice Empress' eyes sparkled like two pillars of icy flames. She crossed her legs, sat down behind Hui Yuhao, and pressed one palm against his back. She moved closer to his body, and pressed her other hand on Hui Yuhao's dantian. Thick green flames burned within her eyes in the next moment, and green hues permeated the entire cavern. Not a single inch of iciness was released, and the Ice Empress slowly closed her eyes as she burned her spiritual sense, and a faint smile appeared on her beautiful face while her own voice echoed in her heart. "You're so silly, Sky Dream. I'm not very eloquent and I don't really know what to say, but I can remember everything you've done for me over the years. Even though I'm cold, you've melted me, and this is all I can do. This is the best kind of love I can give you. I'm burning my spiritual sense, and we will no longer be separated." Icy waves surged into Hui Yuhao's body, and the revolting soul power within his dantian immediately quieted. Not because his soul power stopped circulating, but because it was frozen by those strange icy waves. Long Xiao's soul power was formidable, but the Ice Empress was burning her spiritual sense, and the power of her spirit wasn't inferior to that of an ultimate Doluo. That was pure freezing power, and both spiritual power and soul power would be instantly frozen. Hui Yuhao's expression became a lot calmer as the soul power within his dantian froze. He slowly took a deep breath, and his aura was as solemn as ever. There seemed to be dragon roars echoing through the air with his exhalation. Hui Yuhao was in the most pain that he could be in right before the Ice Empress began burning her spiritual sense. Of course, he knew that he had been tricked, and this was happening to him because he had been too eager for success. However, he couldn't possibly have made another choice under those circumstances as he thought back over the situation. The Sky Dream Ice Worm had given him a guarantee, and the 700,000-year soul ring was so alluring that he couldn't possibly turn it away. Fortunately, the Sky Dream Ice Worm was around. The Sky Dream Ice Worm had absorbed much of the Evil Eye Tyrant King's soul power inside his soul ring, and Hui Yuhao was only absorbing a small portion with his spiritual sea. This resulted in the Evil Eye Tyrant King only being able to mobilize part of his spiritual power when moving against Hui Yuhao in an attempt to consume Hui Yuhao's spiritual power to strengthen himself. The Evil Eye Tyrant King could only reabsorb the spiritual power from the Sky Dream Ice Worm once he had strengthened himself to a certain extent. In other words, the Sky Dream Ice Worm made the Evil Eye Tyrant King's possession process much more challenging and complicated. But even then, the soul power in Hui Yuhao's body was too violent and shocked his body so much that he couldn't resist the Evil Eye Tyrant King's absorption at all. Hui Yuhao was experiencing so much pain that he couldn't fight back at all. The Ice Empress burning her spiritual sense was like a lifeline to Hui Yuhao at a time like this, and the soul power within his body immediately settled down as he heaved a long sigh of relief. Hui Yuhao relied on his formidable spiritual power as he exhaled, and he readjusted and realigned all the disorganized soul power within his body. His yin-yang complement soul cores began to spin stably again, and immense gravitational forces appeared once more that withdrew and took back the chaotic soul power and spiritual power running through his passageways. The Evil Eye Tyrant King naturally discovered the big changes in Hui Yuhao as soon as they occurred, and he turned pale with fright. He had already exposed himself, and he understood that if Hui Yuhao regained the upper hand, then there was nothing left for him but death. The Evil Eye Tyrant King no longer had his original body. Even though he had taken his spirit and his essence with him, he was still quite a far cry from Hui Yuhao, who was an ultimate Doluo and had yin-yang complement soul cores. The Evil Eye Tyrant King didn't have a single chance if Hui Yuhao could concentrate all his attention on dealing with him. The Evil Eye Tyrant King had no choice at a time like this, and he didn't even have time to think as he launched his attack as soon as possible. The Evil Eye Tyrant King couldn't let Hui Yuhao catch his breath as the energy that he had hidden within Hui Yuhao's spiritual sea erupted, and a single wheel of evil light glowed above it. Hui Yuhao had his legs crossed, and a blood-red evil eye surfaced behind his back. Evil light flickered as the entire cave was tainted red. Tang Wutong was already in meditation. Even though her situation was a lot better than Hui Yuhao, she had to concentrate fully if she wanted to completely absorb the vast soul power that Yi Shishui had left behind for her, and she had to do so while in meditation. Therefore, she didn't know such big problems were happening to him. Hui Yuhao's entire body trembled, and a vertical eye gradually opened on his forehead. However, there were no longer any rose-gold sun patterns around his vertical eye. Instead, there were strange dark red patterns that were like tiny snakes that climbed out from his vertical eye and began spreading throughout his head, like they were about to swallow his entire skull. The Evil Eye Tyrant King used his full strength in this attack. The Ice Empress, who was standing behind Hui Yuhao, was overcome with fear, as she didn't expect the Evil Eye Tyrant King to have hidden such formidable power within Hui Yuhao's body, to the point where he almost couldn't resist at all. However, Hui Yuhao finally stabilized all the soul power within his body with the Ice Empress' help, though the intense agony made him feel like his spiritual sea was being torn apart. His spiritual sea's water had been completely solidified, and cracks began to appear as liquid that resembled dark red lava emerged from those cracks. They quickly permeated across his entire spiritual sea, and the goal was simple: he had to consume this entire spiritual sea. The Evil Eye Tyrant King's evil eye that was hovering above Hui Yuhao's spiritual sea was becoming increasingly clear and conspicuous as it unleashed its full strength and attempted to consume Hui Yuhao's spiritual sea. The evil eye could start consuming Hui Yuhao's spiritual soul core once it finished consuming his spiritual sea, and when that happened, the Evil Eye Tyrant King could almost control Hui Yuhao's entire body. The Evil Eye Tyrant King had 700,000 years of cultivation, and he believed it wouldn't be difficult to control the violent soul power. Hui Yuhao was in a very disadvantaged position, and he almost couldn't resist at all. The Evil Eye Tyrant King was consuming large patches of his spiritual sea, and his own soul power was just starting to stabilize. Whirlpools mixed with soul power and spiritual power rushed towards his spiritual sea, but the Evil Eye Tyrant King's spiritual origin kept blocking them, and didn't allow Hui Yuhao to help himself. The Evil Eye Tyrant King's aim was very precise. He wanted to dominate Hui Yuhao's spiritual sea at all costs. When that happened, and if he could arrest Hui Yuhao's spiritual soul core, he could reduce Hui Yuhao's control to as low as it could get. Everything would become a lot easier. Hui Yuhao tried to break through several times before he suddenly stopped. He quietly adjusted his soul power and controlled his two soul cores' rotations. He seemed like he was temporarily giving up on his spiritual sea, and that made the Evil Eye Tyrant King extremely surprised. Does this child not want his spiritual sea anymore? The dark red colors continuously covered large patches of Hui Yuhao's spiritual sea. Dark red patterns also stretched to more places on his face, and his expression appeared unnaturally sinister. The Ice Empress figure behind him became increasingly illusory, though the freezing power produced from her burning her spiritual sense could at least ensure that the soul power within Hui Yuhao's Dantian wouldn't cause him trouble for the time being. The entire process was very slow. Day passed into night, and night passed into day, while Hui Yuhao was facing a test of life and death. The Evil Eye Tyrant King became increasingly excited. He could clearly feel that Hui Yuhao's resistance was becoming smaller and smaller. He wouldn't need too much time before he could control Hui Yuhao's entire spiritual sea, and when that happened, Hui Yuhao would have no chance to turn the tables. Hui Yuhao seemed completely unaware of this fact. He was just channeling his soul power quietly, and he had already completely withdrawn all his disorganized soul power and fused it back into his two soul cores. He could even absorb some of the soul power that the Ice Empress had frozen, and he fused it into his soul core. He cultivated at the same time, and allowed his yin-yang complement soul core soul power to nourish his body, and to strengthen himself. The aura that he gave off resembled somebody who was preparing to break through to become an ultimate Dolor, and to form a third soul core. He seemed to completely overlook the Evil Eye Tyrant King's existence. The Evil Eye Tyrant King was anxious about that, because the unknown would always be most frightening. No living being would voluntarily relinquish control over his or her own body, so there had to be something amiss because Hui Yuhao wasn't interfering with his attempt to control his spiritual sea. But he couldn't possibly ask him. And Hui Yuhao couldn't possibly answer him even if he did ask. Therefore, He became exceptionally careful as he continued dominating Huiyuhao's spiritual sea, but this extra care made him slow down a lot more. Inside the Sun Moon Empire's radiant city, martial law was finally lifted. Over an entire month, Radiant City had been subject to martial law for a month, and more than 200,000 soldiers had stood guard at every alleyway within Radiant City. All kinds of aerial surveillance Soul tools dotted the skies above, as the city spent a jittery month in sensitivity. All the shops and businesses in Radiant City had been temporarily closed over the past month. There was a vigorously resentful and grievous atmosphere in the air that chilled everyone's spines. The reason was because the emperor who had expanded the Sun Moon Empire's territory by more than a third, and who had only ruled over the empire for a short while, had died for some unknown reason. The Sun Moon Empire didn't announce the reason for Xu Qianran's death. All they announced to the public was that the emperor was dead. Radiant City descended into chaos in the following month, especially for the royal family, who were an utter mess. Xu Qianran was dead, and there were still many direct descendants of the royal bloodline. According to the laws, the person who would inherit the throne should be Xu Qianran's only son, the Sun Moon Empire's crown prince, Xu Yunhan. However, Xu Yunhan was far too young, so how could the royal family's members not look for alternatives? Radiant City was in disarray. Different sides fought each other, and that was especially so for the royal family. The chaos lasted for half a month, and many private armies were mobilized outside Radiant City. The court was also as turbulent as could be. Juzi was the empress, but she remained silent from the beginning to the end, as she was allegedly keeping watch next to Xu Qianran's coffin, and she didn't show herself at all. The worship hall also chose to remain silent. Therefore, everyone seemed to have tacitly agreed that they would allow the royal family's members to determine the eventual victor through their own capabilities. Therefore, several royal members who were relatively more powerful began to fight among each other, and everyone started to form alliances. However, what surprised them was the fact that many individuals chose to remain neutral as they were forming alliances, like they were waiting and looking for something. When Juzi reappeared in court with Xu Yunhan half a month later, and in the moment that she placed Xu Yunhan on the throne, the royal subjects fell into an uproar. But this uproar didn't last for too long. Kong Deming, master of the worship hall, announced that the worship hall only supported the crown prince, who was the rightful heir to the throne. The Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion also announced that they were loyal to the crown prince, along with the Fire Phoenix Legion, the Evil Eye Tyrant Legion, and the Terraclaw Legion. The Sun Moon Empire's armies that were stationed near the borders to readjust and replenish their ranks also announced that they supported the Crown Prince. The Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion, which Huiyuhao had wrecked a long time ago, were all by themselves. Juzi turned the tides in court almost instantly, and all the royal family's members who were most involved in conflict, especially those who had employed private mercenaries, were directly labeled as traitors and charged with treason. They were stripped of their titles and incarcerated for life. Juzi sufficiently displayed her glory and majesty as the war god empress, and she used the remaining half-month to gain control over the entire Sun Moon Empire. She aided Xu Yunhan to ascend to the throne, and she used her status as the empress and commander of the three armies to rule in place of the emperor. Xu Qianran was considered a very capable ruler in the eyes of many of the Sun Moon Empire's citizens. But Juzi was also a very capable ruler, and she was also the war god empress. The effects of many years of life and experience in the army, and in addition to Xu Qianran's almost unreserved support, were on full display. Every single opposing voice was silenced within a very short period of time. Someone who belonged to the Sun Moon Empire's royal family had found Elder Kong and expressed his disapproval towards Juzi. Elder Kong had asked him plainly, "Could you lead the empire to unite the continent, if the empire were given to you? Do you have the same status as the empress does in the army?" Juzi wasn't just the empress. She had also become a veteran and cornerstone within the military. Support from the military was always the most important as the generations of emperors changed. The Sun Moon Empire still needed some time to rebuild their royal palace. Juzi handled all official business from the beginning to the end. The crown prince, Xu Yunhan, was still young, but he had already become Kong Deming's disciple. He was introduced to soul tools at a young age, while he began cultivating soul power in the most foundational fashion. It wasn't hard to imagine what his future would be like with top-tier soul engineers supporting him. Juzi believed that her son would be very talented in the future. Juzi stood quietly at her window, while her flowing yellow dress that stretched over the ground sufficiently displayed her majesty and elegance. She wore a crown adorned with all kinds of beautiful jewels on her forehead, while she revealed a single dash of white in front of her chest. Her hands were interlocked with her palms facing inward as she placed them on her abdomen. Her gaze went through the window in front of her as she stared at the clean night sky. She had been standing here for an entire hour, and she maintained this position from the beginning to the end, without moving an inch. There was some moisture on her long eyebrows, like her eyebrows were decorated with water crystals. "Why did you have to tell me?" she muttered under her breath. "Why did you have to tell me that you won't return for another few years? Do you know the pressure that you give me when you're around, and that the hatred in my heart is also suppressed? But you're not around, and you're never by my side. Why do you have to trust me? Why?" Tears rolled down her face, slipped across her exquisite chin and dripped down onto the ground. There seemed to be unlimited pain in her eyes. She seemed to make a very difficult decision after a long time, and she closed her eyes as her tears stopped. "I'm sorry, Yu Hao." The entire cavern had been filled with dark red colors. Tang Wutong, who was sitting in a corner with her legs crossed, was radiating a faint golden light that separated herself from the dark red colors. She was sitting there like a beautiful statue, and the golden sun and purple moon behind her flickered faintly, but were still incomplete. She was in deep meditation, and she no longer felt anything about the outside world. Hui Yuhao's entire face had become dark red, and frightening dark red patterns that were like tentacles stretched from his face, down through his neck, and straight for his chest. The dark red hues that were permeating across the entire cavern were coming from him. The enormous dark red eye behind his back had completely turned into the Evil Eye Tyrant King's appearance. More accurately put, it was a miniature Evil Eye Tyrant King. Hui Yuhao seemed to have lost all consciousness, and his breathing was so thin that it almost wasn't there. The Ice Empress figure behind him had disappeared completely, and there was only some bluish-green light that flickered incessantly beneath his chest. Hui Yuhao's spiritual sea was completely red, and there were only several fine golden patterns that could barely be seen within his dark red spiritual sea. This video will end here.